back to round 4 of the Unconditional Surrender League. In the last episode, I covered the opening of the game I was playing against Canberra. That was a defence. In this game, we're going to look at my East First opening against Ramsay Bolton. An East First opening means I break the Nazi-Soviet pact rather than appeasement at the start of the game with the intention of invading the Soviet Union in 1940. I start the game with attacks on Poland and Denmark. In 2nd edition you wanted 2 invasions to minimise the chances of Italy entering for the Allies. That's no longer a factor, so I'm a little bit doubtful about this particular set of initial invasions, but that's what I did in this game. Conquering Poland allows me to put up a marker in Lithuania or Hungary, but not in Romania, because to place a marker, the country needs to border both the conquered country and a currently active country in your faction, and Romania does not do the latter. I've now had a couple of games to think about diplomacy in the Balkans with the revised rules, and broadly I've come to a few conclusions. The key to the Balkans is Yugoslavia. With its military strength, this was always a state the Axis wanted to get as the game previously stood, but it's even more important now. Yugoslavia borders Romania, Bulgaria and Greece, and therefore allows the activation of any of those. Of the 3, Greece is probably the most useful, as it is likely to last longest into the endgame, and it provides a route to spend successes on Turkey. Which means I am assuming an initial invasion of Hungary with a pro marker spent on Yugoslavia, then an invasion of Romania with a variety of options available, including spending a marker on Poland. There are lots of pros and cons to an Axis Poland. I got a 2nd success. I think I'm practically obligated to spend this on Italy. Needing 3 successes means you need to spend them when you get them. I get a 3rd success in November and immediately activate Italy. My feeling is that rapid activation of Italy is a must in an East First game. It's a little more complicated in a historical. I declare war on Hungary in December with the intention of then attacking Romania and activating Yugoslavia. This will allow for a full line attack on the Soviets. Since I have Italy on side, I'll be using my strategic moves to move Italian units to the Eastern Front. By February, I've taken Hungary and am in position to attack Romania. This is an interesting implementation point. The Soviets want to strategic move a unit in to support Romania. I would like to attack that and pin it. Interestingly, I cannot get to it with the 6 movement points the computer is indicating, except by passing through hexes that are in Russia. However, that doesn't activate East Invaded. Apparently, East Invaded is only activated if I finish a move in Russia or attack into it. I'm not sure that is technically how the rule should be implemented, but it is worth noting that at this point that is how the rule is implemented on Board Game Arena. I cannot blitzkrieg the Romanians in a single turn, but I have trapped the Soviet unit, which will not now be able to get supply, and I'm threatening to take Bucharest if the Romanians do not redeploy. I get fair weather in March, which pretty much ends this. In case you're wondering why my panzer near Bucharest is out of supply, it's because Yugoslavia is not yet in the game, and the supply line west of Bucharest runs northwest of Belgrade. The collapse of Romania allows me to activate Yugoslavia. That's actually a 2.5 rules change, and I think it's going to make Yugoslav entry more likely, since its large army means you would rather have it than Hungary or Romania, and conquering Romania costs the Soviets a factory at the end of the game. Ramsay Bolton refuses to hold the border here. I generally don't retreat until April, because I know April will be bad weather, but I'm obviously working on the question of whether or not May will also be bad weather. Part of this is a trade-off. The earlier the Axis player moves, the sooner US entry ultimately happens. So, do you move here or do you wait until May? It also impacts France. you might not get good weather in May to go into France, and this will mean that the French are activating in May, so swings and roundabouts on whether or not this is a good idea to withdraw here. Okay, so now I have fair weather in June, and the Soviets have 36 national will, so it's time to commence full-on attack, beginning with the suppression of the Soviet air. The Soviet line just isn't a match for the Germans in 1940. I've seen them hold, but I don't think it's a realistic possibility, and I think it almost always results from Axis mistakes. This feels much more like the 1940 invasion of France, that there's nothing that the Allied player can do to hold this position. They just have to hope that either they get outrageous luck or that the Axis make some serious blunder. And this turn gets the German forces to Rostov and reduces the Soviets to 20 national will. And the collapse comes in August, with very little serious opposition. Italian units get to repatriate all the way back to Italy, where they are useful, but German units have to repatriate into the occupied USSR. I activate Greece with the political success. This gives me a bordering country on Turkey, so the potential to activate that. By the end of the year, I control 4 minor allies, 3 of which, Italy, Turkey and Yugoslavia, either bring significant military forces or have significant tactical value. May 1941 is not fair weather, but I have no real choice about declaring war because of my earlier invasion of the USSR in April. So again, this is one of those where you're looking at it and thinking, well, maybe it would have been better if I hadn't gone into the USSR in April and just stayed on the border. We can see here the advantage of having Turkey in. I don't think leaving Aleppo uncontested is a good idea, because if I take it, then I have supply to go round and pressure that British unit on the flank, but there are no good choices in Syria. Africa is an issue in the East First opening. The Axis will have a short temporary advantage for a few months, but it won't last. Eventually, the combined British and French naval forces will overwhelm the Italian navy and cut the supply. I make only modest progress on the French front. It's poor weather. Unfortunately, did not get this set up properly. I should have activated the Netherlands and Belgium when I was fighting the Soviets, so that they are Soviet rather than Western allies. At the Alps, I push the defending unit back 1 hex, which is a major gain because it allows infiltration round it, but that's all I achieve in Europe. I get poor weather in June as well, which seriously limits an advance in northern France. We're going to see that this is really important, but it is very unlikely. The odds of both turns being poor weather in the mild zone are just 1 in 6. 1 in 3 games you'll actually have fair weather in both, and most games you'll get one of them being poor weather. But the effect is basically to stalemate the German forces both in the north and the Alps. And you can see here how essential it is that Italy be in the conflict. Otherwise, you'd free up too many French units for the defence in the north. I get spectacularly unlucky in Africa. The Western Desert Force kills the German unit I had deployed there, which is a really bad set of 6-1 splits. I should have had an Italian garrison backstopping this, and that is going to cost me. I will bring a convoy into Tobruk to try and hold it. I get some luck at Gabes. The DD doesn't result in an eliminated French unit, but it gives me the city on 1 national will. The situation is now precarious. The British and French navies are close to collapsing the Italian supply line. One of my German units is down, and the fort at Tobruk is in danger. The big problem I've had is 2 consecutive months of poor weather in Europe, while I've had to sustain fighting in North Africa. Obviously, that breaks automatically in July, so now the Turkish forces are able to make fair weather attacks. Fair weather also means I can move in Europe. I spend the surprise attack marker and suppress the French air, then begin my attack at Brussels. Ideally, I want to pin the units at Antwerp and the First Guard if possible. I achieve a breakthrough and get close to Paris. I don't follow up this attack because it would be a supply trap. I now attack along the Alps. Note that I start with the regular unit in the south. With double support, I have a 5 in 36 chance of a DD. Also, I'll be able to pin the guard unit. I'm making progress this turn, but not fast enough. My supply fails in North Africa, and the British throw in a surprise marker to seize Tripoli. I couldn't really stop this. I just don't have the forces, and sooner or later they were going to fail somewhere. Ramsay Bolton forms a new line along the Seine. I can't critique too much because this defence does work, but I have some doubts about the evacuation of parts of the Maginot Line. My issue is the junction at the western end. As long as that fort holds, then all supply to Paris has to come through Calais, which the British could have attempted to hold. The French have 16 national will once I take Calais, which means I will need to find 8 more cities to finish this, and that's not easy. Within easy reach for my troops are Le Havre, Cherbourg and Dijon, but that is only 3. If I get some luck, I might be able to take the garrison at Strasbourg. 26 and 36 on the isolated garrison. Unfortunately, only one full-strength unit, and I don't get it. However, I succeed in opening up a route through the Alps, which allows me to isolate Dijon. Personally, I might have retreated northwest in this situation. Lyon cannot actually be taken this turn as there are no more units, and it would have prevented Dijon from being isolated, which I take relatively easily. This could have gone better. The French line has held, which is a problem. They are down to 9 national will, but that means I still have 5 cities to take. Assuming I get Strasbourg, Lyon and Le Havre, I'd need 2 more. Perhaps 1 if I kill some French units, but it's hard to see where those are coming from. Could I have played this better? I did screw up with my Posen switches. I didn't get the activation of Belgium and Holland right. I didn't backstop the garrison at Tobruk. So I definitely made errors. I think they were all fairly small. I could probably have had an Italian unit in position to grab Lyon this turn, which would have helped, but I don't think it would have fundamentally altered it. And of course, the big one, I could have delayed my Soviet attack 1 turn, which means that I would have been fighting for 1 month less in Africa. So the African collapse would only be happening next turn rather than this turn. It'd buy me basically 1 more turn in France. There's a bit of me that wonders whether or not I should have saved this position in order to do some replays myself. Ramsay Bolton needs there not to be fair weather in October, November for the French to hold, and needs to survive this turn. They definitely can't survive 2 turns of fair weather. To me, the weakness on the line is the 3rd French. If the 3rd French can be forced to retreat, it allows me to take Vichy and to isolate the French unit southwest of Paris. The Italians can take a point of air from the French, and I can potentially get 3 attacks in with the Panzer. I have 2 sorties of my own to commit. Things hang in the balance here. If the French fall, I can activate Iraq and turn things around in Africa. Failing that, I'll be facing a Soviet re-entry while I'm still tied down by the Western Allies. But unfortunately, no luck. The 3rd French holds its ground, preventing the lines collapsed. Was I unlucky here? Yes. The chances of achieving the DR, all I really needed to do this, were better than 7 and 8. Now, that is not to say that this was not a well-played defence, but it's important to think about that because I need to evaluate the East-First opening, and obviously, if I was just a hair's breadth from succeeding here, and I lost because of some very unlucky rolls, then the opening's probably sound. Dislodging the French armour is not really compensation. And the French line holds. And October is severe weather, so no chance of a breakthrough. So is this wildly out on the edge? The 41 French army is quite tough, and there are good defensive lines in France. Once the German air power is exhausted, the standard units are essentially fighting on even terms with the French. Actually, slightly better than even terms for the motorised and the armour. You need to create gaps to gain ground, and even if I dislodged the 3rd French, at best I could have hoped to take 3 cities this turn. Bad weather would still have stopped me. And the French get another turn of bad weather in November. Bits of luck in December. The tank had its retreat blocked, and in severe fights no better than a regular unit. That reduces the French to 4 national will. I'll need some luck here, as there is a 50-50 chance of the Russians re-entering the war each turn. It takes until February for the Moscow Treaty to end, but I have not collapsed France when it happens. Severe weather just doesn't give me a realistic chance of achieving a breakthrough in France. I need at minimum poor. On the Eastern Front, all I can do is wait and see. If the line holds in poor weather, it's a pretty grim position, and it is lost unless I can break the French and transfer to the Eastern Front before the fair weather breaks here. Let's talk about this problem in general. I don't think, in hindsight, that I handled it well in this game. The problem is that forces on the Eastern Front are just too weak to hold against the Soviets. Just hold, and it does need to do more than hold. They need to collapse the USSR again. Otherwise, I'm going to be fighting on two fronts. And that's the difference between the East First and the historical openings. In the historical opening, the collapse of France is virtually certain, because France only has 20 national will. You can afford to wait until July to launch that attack. There is no danger of the Italians being overwhelmed in Africa by the combined British-French fleets. But the problem in the historical opening is that collapsing the USSR is hard. Exactly how hard is a little difficult to say, and it clearly depends on the weather. But if the Soviet forces are still fighting in January 43, the Axis are doomed. Apart from anything else, they're down 16 national will for the endgame. East First avoids that problem. The Soviets will collapse and the Axis will get the 16 national will. But they do have to collapse the Soviets twice. If France holds on, because they now have 30 national will, that creates a massive issue. The Axis cannot get their forces back to the Eastern Front, and there is a very real danger, as happened in this game, of losing the contest in the Mediterranean. And effectively, that is the same as the Soviets making it to 43 in the historical. Whether it's slightly better or slightly worse is open to debate. Obviously, this depends heavily on the weather, and I'm talking here about play between relatively closely matched players, where there's a large discrepancy in player skill that will often overwhelm other considerations. But I think going back through this game has convinced me the Axis need 4 turns of fair weather to collapse France in the East First opening. 3 just isn't enough. I don't think I was so unlucky that I'd have managed it in 3 turns. I don't think I made any truly major blunders. And it seems clear to me as I worked back through my notes of what happened that while I could correct minor misplays, I absolutely did need a 4th turn of fair weather to defeat the French. Spoiler, the French did indeed collapse on the very next fair weather turn. So that reinforces the idea that 4 turns is enough. You probably don't need 5, but 3 isn't. That means the chance of an East First going badly wrong going to be about 4 in 54, a little less than 1 in 10 games. Now, to really compare that, we need to ask, what are the odds of the USSR holding an historical opening? What weather would they need to have a good chance? And unfortunately, that calculation's much harder, because the invasion of the USSR in historical operates in 3 separate operational phases. You have the initial Barbarossa phase in 41, you have the Soviet counterattack in the winter, and then you have the final Soviet defense in 42. So the question is, do the Axis need to get 9 fair weather turns, or 8, or 7? They'll definitely fail if they get 6, but that's only 1 in 50 games. So I just don't have enough data to compare the 2 openings. But if you've got any thoughts on how many fair weather turns the Axis need to collapse the USSR in a historical opening, then feel free to leave those in the comments. Basically, the problem here at the end of this is I'm no wiser as to whether an East First or a historical opening is better. Though I do think that after this happens, I definitely don't handle it as well as I should have done. But for now, here endeth the lesson, and that will need to wait for the next episode.